This is such a crazy story on so many levels, you guys. And for me personally, it has an additional layer because this is the story on which I cut my teeth as a young reporter at Fox News. Many of you may remember that. I actually saw a lot of people tweeting at me and emailing us saying they do remember our coverage because it was not only a massive travesty of justice, almost, but it was a massive travesty of journalism. And virtually everyone was sinful. I will be honest, I don't remember anyone other than yours truly and Dan Abrams at Court TV at the time, reporting honestly on this case, reporting accurately on this case. Everyone else in the media rushed to judgment because what was alleged in this case, for those of you who were not around or too young to care, or it's just been a long time, was that on March, I don't remember the date, but in March of 2006, 3 Duke lacrosse players gang raped a woman of color, a black woman from Durham, North Carolina. That's where Duke is located. And Durham has a not well-off side of town, and it is a minority town. So these are 3 white boys at Duke on the lacrosse team and 1 black stripper who claimed she'd been gang raped by them. I mean, just in those allegations alone, you can see and feel how explosive it was and would have been. And it allegedly happened at a house in which the Duke lacrosse team was holding a party. So it wasn't just these 3, it was the team. And this hit the media like wildfire. They loved this story. Now with retrospect, we've got some, 19 years of dealing with this version of the news media under our belts. So you're not surprised to hear that given those dynamics, the racial differences, the class differences, the gender differences, that the media rushed to judgment against these boys. But at the time, believe it or not, we weren't like that yet in the media. We weren't used to the media doing this. It was still a time in which we tended to be more judicious in our coverage and careful. And this was the before and after moment at which we abandoned that. It really was. This was the seminal moment in the media leaning into what we now know as wokeness when they looked at cases and stories like this one. It was a travesty in many ways. And thank God these 3 boys wound up getting let off the hook by the Attorney General who stepped in to take over. But the media, they got away with it. And they continued to sin in exactly the same way they did in that case ever since. Here we are almost 20 years later, and they're still at it. And that's really what's remarkable about this case. And for me, it is personal because I lived it firsthand. And I'll tell you what brought me to the case. I was hired by Fox in August of 2004. I had done a year in journalism working for the ABC affiliate down in Washington, D.C. And so I was young in my reporting career, but I had almost 10 years of legal practice under my belt as a litigator. So I was very used to looking at disputed fact patterns and being asked to make arguments to judges and juries and to behind the scenes, talk frankly with my own teams about what we believed was true. You don't come into it with any superior knowledge as a lawyer. You have what your client tells you. You have what you hear from opposing clients in depositions and in court. And you form your own judgment on what you believe. And if you can get to the actual truth, it's very helpful. You may argue it one way or another when you're actually in court, but you do your level best to figure out what did happen. And that's exactly how I approached this case. But even I, who was not woke and who was a trained litigator, needed a warning on this case because I was still young. I was 33. 33 when I joined Fox. But by this time, March of 06, I was 35. And I'm going to confess, I saw the fact pattern. I was like, I could see it happening. I'm not so like jaded, certainly not by media. I was barely in it, or by life, that I could never see this happening. Lacrosse players, I know I love lacrosse players, truth be told, because I went to Syracuse and I dated the captain of the team that won 3 national championships there. And I knew a lot of these guys and they were great guys. They certainly weren't a bunch of rapists, but they liked to party. It's just the general atmosphere of debauchery did not seem impossible to me. And a bunch of guys really drunk at a party, who's to say it's impossible? So I wasn't ready to condemn them knee-jerk, but I also wasn't of the thought, no way. And Britt Hume put me on this case, who was my boss in the DC bureau. He was the managing editor down there. And it was getting a lot of traction, this case. And he said, you need to go to Durham and get boots on the ground, if you will, and start reporting and breaking news in this case. And I said, okay. And we talked about it. And I said, do you think they did it? And he said, what do you think? And I was like, well, maybe. Now, Britt had a very different background than I did. Britt had gone to, I believe, a private boys' school, and he had sent his own son to a private boys' school for sure in Virginia. And it was a feeder school for programs like Duke Lacrosse, by the way. And Britt had a very nice family background, maybe like a little bit of prestige and connection. I didn't have any of that. Britt had an academic pedigree that was beautiful and a journalistic pedigree that matched. And Britt is a brilliant guy, as you probably all know. Very, very, very smart. And we used to joke in the DC bureau about if Britt says it, it's right. Okay, I realize there are some people who are like, well, he didn't get Trump right. He was not a big fan of Donald Trump first time around. But 9 times out of 10, Britt has his facts straight, and his instincts when it comes to news judgment are spot on. So he said to me, be careful. That deep voice he has, be careful. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, the media senses something here that is not consistent with the Fox News mission. And he was talking about leaning into identity politics. Back then it was called more political correctness. And he said, that's not what we do at Fox News. And he said, go down there and keep an open mind. That was his sole directive to me. Keep an open mind. And honestly, that's all you had to do to get this story right. That's all you had to do. And you know what? Not coincidentally, Dan Abrams, the other person who was getting it right and did get it right, went to Duke. My husband went to Duke. It's the reason that Doug and I got married. I'll explain that later. But anyway, so Dan went to Duke and he knew a lot of these guys too. And he and Britt with that background, they knew from their experience and exposure to guys like no, these are not a bunch of gang rapists who happen to just get into Duke. And they were familiar with media narratives around privilege and white guys that were BS, right? So it was a very interesting collection of those who got it right. And what saved me was my background as a litigator and Britt's advice. Okay, so I go down to Durham, North Carolina, and I was very determined to not only pursue the guys and their story, and I developed the best sources you could get on team defense, but also to pursue her, the accuser, and see if we couldn't find something exclusive, something more. And boy, did we ever. So we covered both angles of the story and had great sources. And I'll tell you one other reason why Britt had it right, my boss, and encouraged me. Because he sensed immediately this is a political story in addition to a legal one. Because what we had in the Duke case was a white district attorney who was up for re-election in an election year in, as I pointed out, a majority-minority district. So it was a chance to pander. It was a chance to say to the black residents of Durham, I'll get those privileged white pricks, even though I'm a white guy. And Britt read it. And we actually would later find out that Mike Nifong, if he could retire at this sort of higher level, if he could get reelected and he could retire at that level, he would have a much higher pension than he otherwise would. And so he had a personal stake in it, not just to get reelected, but also personal financial stake in a way in pursuing this case and leading us to believe there really was one. This is the villain of the case. I mean, he's the biggest villain. Now, Mike Nifong is the biggest villain involved here. And again, the reason we're covering this again is because the other main figure in making this case happen against these young men, Crystal Mangum, has now, for the first time in 19 years, admitted it was all a lie. We knew that. We just never heard her say it. And by the way, we just got reaction from one of the boys, and I'll read it to you in a minute, one of his lawyers. So we go down to Durham. My producer, Jake Gibson, our photog, and I, and we start working sources. And it was insane. So many crazy things happened when I was down there. One night we were trying to find her. She was impossible to find. She had gone underground. She accused 3 boys of rape, and she went completely underground. No one could find her. No one's even trying to find her because they just wanted to believe her story. And what we did to find her, I mean, we went into this strip club after strip club. It was hilarious, actually, because we'd walk in. We try to act like civilians so they wouldn't mark us as press. And I mean, we were 2 steps into the door of these facilities, and they'd say, "Press." And my team looked at me and said, "It's you." They said, "We're their bread and butter." They would never suspect us as press. Anyway, we had many funny conversations with these strip club owners where I got my fake strip club stripper name, where we asked the one guy, what do you think, what would my name be if we got up here? And one of my guys said something like, "How about Sugar?" And he said, "White confectioner sugar," which is like the pastiest sugar there is. I don't think it was a compliment. Anywho, on we go. That's just one memory I have. She was sat down by the police and given a photo lineup of the Duke lacrosse team. That was her allegation. "I've been gang raped by Duke lacrosse players." And so they gave her the Duke lacrosse roster, which is not an appropriate lineup at all. That's accepting that it was definitely somebody on the Duke lacrosse team. Any sane person would have put in, at the police station, would have put in non-Duke lacrosse players, plenty of them, into a bigger lineup and asked her to choose. Well, it turns out she failed even the stacked test that they gave her and was unable to identify anybody. And we would later learn that she went through it at least twice and was unable to identify anybody. And then under pressure, she selected one of the team's captains, Dave Evans, who was a senior, and 2 others. And Colin Finnerty and Reed Seligman were the other big losers of the Crystal Mangum guesses that day. That's Finnerty on the right with the yellow tie, Evans in the middle, and Reed Seligman on the left. Just so you know, they almost went to jail for 30 years. These 3 boys almost went to prison for decades. For those of us who have been holding our breath for the past several months, waiting for this election, we can finally exhale. Work can now be done on the major issues this country's facing, one of the most significant being our national debt. The fact is our nation's broke, and that debt is a house of cards that cannot be quickly dismantled. So the strategy for you probably remains the same when it comes to your investments. You might want to diversify your savings. This is why I want to tell you about Birch Gold. So many things are out of our control, out of our president's control, so it can be important to have a safe haven for your savings. Birch Gold Group can help you convert an IRA or 401k into an IRA in physical gold. And the best news is it does not cost you 1 cent out of pocket. Text MK to 989898 to get your free info kit on gold. Plus, right now you will receive a free 1-ounce silver eagle for every $5,000 purchased. Protect your savings with Birch Gold and text MK to 989898 to claim your eligibility for free silver today. Thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.